Hi, my name's Mark and welcome to the channel. Today's video is all about my CatKnit sweater. It's a lot like my Halibut sweater with one major difference, and that's cats. In this video, we'll trace the progress of this project, everything from the adaptations I made to the pattern, and then to some of the disappointments I have with my finished project. So if you're interested in coming along to learn about the process or spend a bit of time with me, then stick around and let's get into it. So here we are, my project is complete, but not without some ups and downs along the way. I wanted to give you a chance to see this sweater on me. We'll look at it in much more detail later in the video before I go back to the Halibut sweater. So I'm wearing my version of the CatKnit Pullover by Andrea Rangel, but I decided to make some adaptations to make this sweater much more similar to the Halibut sweater by Caitlin Hunter. So let me pop that sweater back on and we'll talk about how I got started with this project. My Halibut sweater by Caitlin Hunter is one of my favorite projects. It's one of my favorite things I've made. It's also one of my favorite things to wear. I think, first of all, the navy color suits me well. I think it's a really flattering color. It makes me, I don't know, pop, stand out. It makes me feel confident, and I often get a lot of positive feedback when I wear this sweater. Next, I really love the fit. If you've made the Halibut or you've read about it or watched other videos, you might know that the yoke, where the colorwork is all the way down to the underarm split, is pretty deep. And for some people, if you're petite, if you're shorter, if you just have a shorter armhole depth than me, it might be too long of a yoke. And so some people are frustrated by how much the sweater ends up sort of hanging on them or swallowing them. But for me, it's a perfect fit. As a man knitting patterns that are usually written as women's patterns or unisex patterns, the only adjustment I ever have to make is the armhole depth. I follow those patterns exactly, but I do check in and typically need to add maybe 2 inches to armhole depth just to make sure that my sweater has enough wiggle room and I don't have fabric scrunched right in my underarm. So this sweater suits me really well. This takes us to the release of Andrea Rangel's CatKnit Pullover. When Andrea released this pattern, I had several of you and several other people that I see on a day-to-day basis send me the pattern and say, you need to make this. I'm a cat person. I've got 3 of my own here at home. I have a lot of whimsical cat things in my life. So I agree, a CatKnit sweater is appropriate for my brand. At the same time, I had a few reservations about jumping into the project. So let's look at the project page and talk about my initial thought process when deciding whether a project is for me or not. So the first thing I noticed is that this project is made from fingering weight yarn. That means my stitches would be pretty small. I would also need to find a good fingering weight yarn to work with. I don't have a favorite fingering weight yarn for colorwork projects, and so that was the first place where I thought, maybe I'm not ready to knit this. Maybe it's not the right thing for me right now. The next issue or qualm I had with the project is that it's fingering weight, so the stitches are small. That means it's going to be a bigger time commitment on my end to do that size gauge with colorwork. And I've done colorwork and fingering weight sweaters before, but when this was released and when I was deciding whether or not I wanted to make it, it was right at the beginning of 2025. And I was trying to finish up some other projects. I had other things on my queue, on my wish list that I wanted to start. So this was kind of being inserted somewhere in that line, and I wasn't game for a time-consuming project. I wanted something that I could get on and off the needles maybe in a month. Then there was the general look, the overall design of the sweater to consider. And I love the idea of it. I love a cat sweater. I wasn't sure if the colorwork design was exactly my style. Something about the cats being very stripy, kind of an abrupt stop at the bottom of the colorwork pattern, just didn't fit my mold. I didn't envision myself looking good or maybe enjoying wearing that exact design. So I was hesitant, and initially I decided I'm not going to knit this. It's a pass for me for now. Then we fast forward another week or two, and more people were saying, "Oh, have you seen this? You should make it." And I thought, well, since I come here on YouTube and share my projects and often ask for feedback and recommendations, I thought it was worth pursuing. So after I decided I would give this a shot, I started to make my game plan. That included first adapting the pattern to be made with DK weight yarn. Sometimes when I make a substitution of yarn weights, I just make a different size in the pattern. So occasionally I'll choose a fingering weight pattern, and if it's a heavy enough fingering or the gauge isn't too far off from what I could achieve with DK weight yarn, I'll substitute the yarn and then work a smaller size in the pattern. My stitches are going to be bigger. I'm going to be on a slightly larger needle size. So instead of making my size in the pattern, I'll go down a size or two and then get a sweater that typically works out without me having to make too many other adjustments along the way. Because this is color work and because the yoke is already lengthy, if I were to use a different yarn and needle and have bigger stitches, it means that my row gauge would also be different. It would be longer than the row gauge achieved by the designer. So the long yoke that would probably fit me pretty well would maybe be several inches longer, giving me a sweater that proportionally wouldn't work out to be anything like what I'm envisioning or what the pattern is showing. So I knew I wanted to use DK weight yarn. I already had the yarn chosen. I had it available to me at my local shop, Around the Table Yarns in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And I needed then to figure out a way to reduce the chart. So step one was to buy the pattern for the CatKnit Pullover. Step two was to figure out what proportions I wanted and how to make this fit DK weight without totally starting from scratch and having to write a sweater pattern. So all of this leads us to the Halibut sweater by Caitlin Hunter. As mentioned, this is one of my favorite sweaters. I like the shape, I like the proportion, I think it works really well on me, and I used Scout from Kelborn Woolens. So I thought this was a perfect model to use for this adaptation of the CatKnit Pullover. So I have both patterns, I'd purchased both of them, I'd already made this one, and then I thought I can probably just follow the same size, the same instructions for this current sweater I'm wearing, and find a way to sort of adapt or scrunch the cat chart, the colorwork chart, into the space that the Halibut chart would take. So that's what I tried to do. If you're an avid colorwork knitter or any sort of pattern designer, then you're probably familiar with Stitch Fiddle, and I had heard of this with conversations at my local shop, other crafting circles I'm in, but I'd never used it myself. So my next step was to use Stitch Fiddle to try to play around with the chart and see if I could make something that worked, that sort of honored the original pattern from Andrea Rangel, but made it fit into the weight of sweater and the proportion of sweater I was envisioning. Stitch Fiddle is a great resource. It's a website you can access from your phone, your computer, your tablet, and with a free account, you can do quite a bit. You can play around with creating your own colorwork charts or texture charts. It could be something for cables, it could be something for colorwork, it could be any sort of design, knit, crochet, Tunisian crochet, I think even more fiber crafts than those three, but I know those three are available. So you can go on and play around with creating whatever size, whatever dimension, and then the actual details of the pattern that you're experimenting with, rewriting, or creating from scratch. So those are all available features with sort of a free user account, but then if you choose to pay for a subscription, you can go quite a bit further. So that's what I ended up doing, just so I could adjust things like the actual gauge. So the little squares or rectangles of the colorwork chart would represent the actual gauge from my pattern, so I could better see sort of the shape of the cat I was creating. And then you can really personalize the colors you're using. So if you're doing a Fair Isle chart or Norwegian knitting, something where you're using several colors, you can customize those colors from anything in the color palette so it really matches what you'll be knitting. I just needed 2 colors for this, but I could still choose colors that really matched the yarns I was going to use. And From there, I started to play around with the pattern. I took the width, the length, and sort of the pacing of increases from the Halibut chart and tried to fit this cat chart into that spacing. And it took a fair bit of playing around. I spent 3 or 4 days going in, pacing it out in different ways, making little adjustments to the cat, just so I would have a very personalized sweater. And after about 4 days of playing around, I had a chart that I was pretty happy with. At that point, I could export or download the chart, so I made it a PDF, I sent it to my iPad, you can put it in Knit Companion, you can print it, so it's very cool to be able to create or adjust your own knitting chart. And if you're not a designer, it makes you feel like you've created like a legitimate pattern that you would have purchased from someone. And if you are a designer, you can of course use it to create and adjust and play with all of those charts you're designing. Another feature in Stitch Fiddle that I didn't use for this project, but I think is very cool, is that you can import a picture, just like a regular picture from the internet, a picture you've taken, and it will create a colorwork chart for you. So I'll show you an example here. If I import a picture of one of my own cats, you can see what it creates, and it shows you how big this project would be and how many colors it's using, and then you can adjust it in any direction. You can use more colors to make it more realistic, more vivid. You can also use fewer colors and use a different gauge if you want the chart to be much smaller. And then of course it becomes a little bit more pixelated or abstract as you make those adjustments. But a very cool feature to kind of snap your fingers and have a whole chart or pattern written for you in no time. So fun to play around with if you're not already familiar with it. Now let's pivot to our cat sweater. That's better. Thanks, Gus. Once I had made my adjustments and finalized the version of the colorwork chart I wanted to use, I could dive into casting on my version of the CatKnit sweater. So everything from there was pretty straightforward. I followed the instructions for the Halibut sweater, and when the time came for the chart, I used my adapted CatKnit colorwork chart. After that, it was a pretty smooth process for the sweater. There was one point when Scout yanked a big strand of yarn out of the colorwork portion, like 10 inches of yarn pulled out. It wasn't torn or ripped, but the tension was off. So I had to go back in and carefully redistribute that tension, but it was a crisis averted. And then later in the process, and you may have heard me say this in other videos, I ran out of yarn. This is part of the reasons I'm a little disappointed with the sweater. I'll get to it later. I was working with like 3 different dye lots. This was an impulse decision to make the sweater. That's part of my regret. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. But when I was about, I don't know, 80%, 85% through the sweater, I ran out of yarn. I had finished 1.5 sleeves. I needed to finish the last sleeve and work my ribbing at the neckline. And I ran out of yarn. I knew I had yarn somewhere. I was sure I had purchased it. I thought I'd already wound it, but I couldn't find it anywhere in this jumbled craft room. And there's always a good bit of mess here because I'm filming things. I've got different projects in front of me. I leave town quite often, so things get put on hold, put in different places. I tore the room apart looking for this yarn because I wanted to finish the sweater. I wanted to wear it back in February, and I just couldn't find it anywhere. So fast forward like 2 months, I find the yarn. It's just sitting at the top of a project bag. Not this project bag, but a different one, of course. So I was able to pull the sweater out about a week ago, finish that sleeve, finish the ribbing at the neck, get it blocked, and now it's late April. It's a little too hot to wear it, but at least I can show it off here. Okay, now for the part that I'm hoping will be a little bit cathartic for me, and that is getting my complaints, getting the dislikes of the project off my chest. The first maybe disappointment I have has to do with this being an impulse project. I'm usually not an impulse knitter. I like to be struck by inspiration and then follow that inspiration, work on a project. So in that way, I'm a controlled impulse knitter, but I'm not an impulse knitter in the way that I would see a project and in the same day cast it on. I'm going to see a project, I'm going to think about it for a few days, I'm going to ask other people in my life. What do you think of this? What do you think of this project versus something similar? I do sort of this or that decision making. And then I'm going to brainstorm the yarn. I'm going to make sure I like the gauge, that I want to be working in that weight of yarn. I'm going to consider the options of yarn I already have or things available to me locally. I don't really ever buy yarn online because I'm blessed to be in an area where we have a lot of yarn shops. So I think about it that way. Do I have access to yarn that I would want to use for this project? And then I have to figure out if that yarn is in stock. If it's not there, then maybe I'm not ready to do that project yet. And I'll wait until the new yarn arrives, until that matching dye lot is there. Then I'll purchase it and sort of follow through. So that's the way my decision-making process usually works for new projects. As mentioned, in this case, several people reached out to share this sweater with me. It was exciting that it was newly released. It was sort of trending because it was something new, and it's different. I mean, it's heavy on the cats, and a lot of people wouldn't want a full-on cat sweater in the same way a lot of people wouldn't want a fish sweater. So it is an impulse decision in that way and its style, but also because it was brand new and people were plugging it. It was being put in front of me. And I thought, oh, do I need to make it? And so I didn't choose overnight to make it. I probably spent about a week or two deciding. But the rest of the impulse comes down to deciding to change it. Working out of a different weight yarn, deciding I would rewrite the chart. And then I wanted to buy Scout from Kelborn Woolens, and we didn't have navy in stock. I love the navy of my Halibut sweater, but I also thought I don't need another navy colorwork sweater like that because that position is filled. So I should use something different. I thought I would love a green sweater. And here's the biggest hiccup. Megan was not in the yarn shop at the same time as me. So in the few days I was considering the color, Megan wasn't there. And if you've watched my other videos, you've heard me talk about Megan. She's one of my best friends. We work together at the yarn shop, and she has such a great sense for color theory. And she also has a great sense for maybe my style and what I wear, what I would enjoy pairing with other things in my wardrobe. So she's a very good sounding board to recommend a color she thinks would work well, or for me to bring colors to and say, what do we think of this? And sometimes it's a simple, yes, that's great. Or she might point out something that would be better, that would maybe better complement me and my appearance or the other things I have and I like to wear. So I'm always grateful for that advice because I doubt myself with color selection. I'm not very good at color theory. I don't have a great grasp or understanding of that. So having someone in my life is very, very, very valuable. So unfortunately, when I was choosing the colors for this sweater, she was not around, and we were also out of stock of a few options. So I knew I wanted green. I was choosing between maybe 3 greens, and then I didn't have many options for the contrast color. So I don't hate this combination. I like the green, but I do think when you look at this sweater on me versus the Halibut sweater on me, I appear in rather different ways. I think my skin and my hair, my coloring looks different, and I definitely feel different wearing them. So those are the first couple of drawbacks of the sweater. First being the impulse decision. Second being maybe the color selection. And then the third drawback of the sweater, I'm going to say, is the fit. Now, I'm pretty sure I chose the same size as the Halibut sweater I made, but I made the Halibut sweater a couple of years ago, and it was one of my first colorwork projects. So my tension then is a bit different, or pretty different, than my tension now. And I think both look nice. I think the colorwork and the floats are good in both, but I think my tension was different enough that the overall fit and drape is vastly different. So I'll show both of these as I'm talking about it, just to highlight how they fit. And I consciously made a decision to bring the neckline of this sweater in further than the Halibut. I like that decision. The Halibut is kind of a scooping neckline, which I chose to do at the time, but I like this, where I can wear sort of anything under it. The Halibut sweater requires me to wear a certain type of collar, certain type of shirt under to make it look normal. The next issue is the sleeves. The sleeves on both of these sweaters are fairly short and are fairly snug. I am wild. I'm wild with sleeves. I'm always making adjustments because I don't like too much of a sleeve. And typically, when I follow the written instructions for a sleeve and the shaping, the decreasing, I end up with too much sleeve. It's too long and it's too big, and then I feel like I've wasted time knitting, I've wasted the materials, and I have too big of a sleeve. So most always, I go in with more rapid decreases for sleeves, and typically it works out with a sleeve I like. I said this, I think, earlier. Several people do not like the sleeves that I make. They think they're too short and maybe too tight. They do stretch with wear, with time. So I think this sweater, the sleeves will grow a little bit with me. But right now it's kind of an odd fit and an odd shape. So whether or not I made the same size or my gauge was way different, I just think this sweater ended up a little bit bigger than it needed to be. I probably could have cut out an entire cat, which again would save me knitting, would save me a bit of yarn. I think it's maybe a little too baggy, a little too oversized. And then I get sort of bunching of fabric between the yoke and the sleeves. And again, I have these very narrowed sleeves, which is my own doing. It's all my own doing. But that's my takeaway on the size. Maybe a little bit bigger than I wanted it to be. And the last element that I don't necessarily love about this sweater is still the end of the color work. The way we get a very hard stop to the color work. I like on the Halibut sweater the way it tapers because of the shape of the fish and the other details between the fish. On this cat sweater, we get the bottom of the cat, where you have their feet, you have sort of their round backsides, the tails. And so, I don't know, up close, there's a lot of color work on this very long yoke, but when I scoot back or you see the join, it just stops. It's kind of abrupt, which I don't think I like the line that creates. It's neither here nor there. It's just a reaction and an observation here on my project. And I think that's about it for my reactions to the project. I can't really speak to the what ifs. What if I had made the original CatKnit pullover with fingering weight, following the chart exactly, following the shaping of the body for that sweater? I don't know. I don't think I'll make it in the future, but I appreciate the pattern. I'm glad it's out there because I'm a cat guy. I'm a lover of cats. I'm a lover of color work, of sweaters. So I'm glad that option is out there. And I think the sweaters I've seen other people make are stunning. So I can't really speak to anything specific to that pattern besides the general style and the original color work chart. As for the halibut, I still really love that sweater. I think the fish and the shaping of the fish work better than my version of the cats that I sort of forced upon it. If you're someone with a short upper body or you're very petite, then the halibut yoke may be way too long for you. For me, it's great. So if you're taller, you might love the fit. And it's a sweater I would make again. I would put maybe other colorwork charts into it, or I'd just make another halibut in other colors in the future because I love the look, I enjoyed the construction, I really liked the colorwork chart. I'm glad to have another sweater. I'm glad to have a cat sweater in my life. I think it was a good learning experience. It showed me quite a bit about working with Stitch Fiddle, with adapting a colorwork chart, with making sure the repeats, all of that line up in the right way. I had some hurdles in the learning process there. So it was a good learning experience. It's not going to be one of my top favorite sweaters, but I think it'll be something cozy. It'll be something kind of quirky, kind of different that hopefully I'll enjoy wearing quite a bit in the future fall, winter, spring seasons. I think that about wraps it up. Let me know your thoughts. Are you a sort of quirky, all-in sweater kind of person? Is this your worst nightmare of a sweater? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I always love to hear from you, and I love to see the conversations that take place there. Speaking of conversations, if you're interested in joining some Zoom sessions, I have Patreon Zoom sessions happening almost every week, at least 3 times a month now. So you can join those Zoom sessions through Patreon, and I'll put the dates up on the screen in case you're interested. We've been having a lot of fun conversations there. And of course, I'm extremely grateful to anyone who chooses to support me and support what happens here on the channel in that way. By just watching the videos, you're also doing me a great deal of support. So thanks for being here. Thanks for clicking on the video and making it to the end of our time together today. As always, happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.